Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we are going to be discussing which class is the best for deep dives and elite deep dives in a solo setting. I recently put up a poll. The reason why I put up this poll is because I've been getting this question a lot on live streams. Usually whenever I am doing deep dives and people are asking me how to do elite deep dives easier, which I do plan on doing a full guide in the future for, as well as just which class is the easiest to do for solo. And I've always stated for me personally, or at least whenever I've been asked this, I would probably say driller, and this is under the assumption that you are going in completely blind. You don't know what's in the deep dive. You don't know exactly what modifiers you're going to get, what missions you're going to get, what secondaries you're going to get, and that's why I would pick driller. Because driller generally does fine on every sort of mission. They may not be the strongest in a particular mission. Something like escorts driller can potentially struggle on. Depends on your loadout heavily, but something like that may not be as easy for driller as it is like gunner. Or something like a mining mission might be easier for scout, but driller can still do the mission pretty quick and pretty effectively. And that's why I usually say driller, especially because of the oil rig missions. The oil rig missions were the main reason as to why, because in certain deep dives, you end up getting low oxygen, oil rig mission with a pump that's at the bottom of, the very edge of the map. And then you have one that's 5 stories up into the ceiling directly above you. And if you're playing gunner, it's a pain to actually connect pipes to actually go that high because you're going to be spending so long in that mission. Or if you're playing scout, you don't really have a good way there. But for all intents and purposes, there's no reason to actually go into a deep dive or an elite deep dive without knowing ahead of time what the missions are, what type of modifiers you're getting, and the order of the missions. If you kind of know those things, then you can make a build for everybody that works on basically all of them, with maybe the exception of like a pipeline that's just in a really bad position to where something like driller or engineer would be obviously the best just because you can set it up ahead of time. So I asked this question to you guys on the channel for votes to see which one you guys would pick for the easiest, and this one went up to engineer by quite a bit. Engineer had 41% of the votes in total, which I'm kind of surprised at. But then again, ahead of time, if you already know what's in the deep dive before you go in, engineer can build basically however you'd like to deal with basically everything. Engineer is super flexible and very versatile. You have a good mobility tool with your platform gun. Your turrets are great for holding an area. You're just in general really great for holding an area. So even on like escort missions or on salvage missions, you can hold the area very well. A secondary that deals tons of damage regardless of which secondary you're using. So even on dreadnought missions or on industrial sabotage missions, you can kill those things really fast. There is a lot of things going for engineer, and not just your secondaries. Your primaries can have a lot of damage on them too. So that does kind of make sense. You have probably the most amount of flexibility, and I can understand why people picked engineer the most. Second most was actually scout, which I was kind of surprised at. Most people saying that scout can go through the missions really quick, and if you want to do the deep dive, sometimes going through the missions really fast is very useful, which I totally agree with. If you're going through the missions quicker than normal, you're going to be using up less nitro, so you have more resupply, so you can use them on the later missions, which can definitely help you. Scout also has a pretty good amount of loadouts that you can take with them. You got good flexibility with him. You got lots of single target damage in some of the different overclocks that you can run, or even non-overclocks. You might struggle against crowd control, but if you know ahead of time that you're getting like Swarmageddon, or you're going to get parasites, or there's just going to be a lot of bugs in general, maybe a big egg hunt, you can always build for crowd control too with scout, and you have a lot of mobility, which is super useful, as well as the flare gun is just super nice in solo, because one of the main issues with playing solo is that your flares don't recharge faster than they do in multiplayer, and there's going to be times where you're just running constantly ahead throwing flares, and you're going to be out by the time you need to kind of search a room, or the room's just going to be so big that flares just don't cut it, and that can be kind of annoying to get grabbed by leeches or something. Coming in third was driller at 24%, about the same as scout, and I've kind of already went over the reasons as to why I would pick driller as the main thing, especially if you're going in blind. Maybe not so much if you're not going in blind, then I would probably agree that engineer would be the best just because the flexibility of the builds. And then gunner came in last at 10%, which I'm also not too surprised about that gunner came in at the least. And this isn't to say that gunner's particularly bad at elite deep dives or anything. All of these classes are fantastic and have really strong builds. And in certain cases, you could have gunner do better than other classes. Let's say you have an elite deep dive that has something like a escort mission followed by a salvage mission followed by another escort mission. Gunner's going to be really strong in that sense, because gunner can definitely hold areas really, really well. And if a mission doesn't need to be done super quick, then gunner is right at home, because usually you have a ton of bullets. You clear up things super quick no matter whether it's a big enemy or small enemy. Your main downside to playing Gunner solo is that you don't have the greatest mobility. So if you do get a pipeline mission that's in a bad spot, it takes you far longer than the other classes to set up, because you're going to have to use your zip lines to get around, which don't particularly move fast unless you're at a decline and you're always going downhill, which certain maps do end up being like that, and then your zip lines are really nice. Zip lines are also super useful in multiplayer because everybody can use them then, and they're great on things like point extracts to where people can just easily hop on them and get right down to the rig. And of course you have your shields, which are fantastic for holding objectives. So if you need to hold an area, Gunner is really good at holding an area. It's just, there are missions where those aren't as needed, where it's more just mobility and just kind of moving from one area to the next, and Gunner's generally the slowest at doing that. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing for Gunner, and in multiplayer it doesn't really matter, because who cares if you're moving slow if the rest of the team can kind of make up for your lack of mobility. You can make up for potentially their lack of damage output or lack of being able to protect objectives or just being able to res people super easy with your shield. So I thought that this was a really fun discussion point to talk about, and something that's very interesting because I hadn't really thought about this until I got asked quite a few times. But tell me your thoughts on which class do you think is the best or the easiest to do deep dives or solo deep dives. Elite deep dives or deep dives solo. Which class do you think would be the best for doing kind of every mission? And also, what kind of class do you think would be the best to go in completely blind with? So thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.